Construction makers.
So we are going to talk about one of the most important concepts in not only competitive Magic, but I think competitive gaming generally speaking.
Yeah.
And it's the concept of who's the beatdown. This concept was originally named and conceptualized by Mike Flores. He wrote an article about this in, I don't know, like 99 for the website The Dojo, which was the first Magic the Gathering strategy website, which shut down in the year 2000. So if you want to read the article, you can read it on StarCityGames.com. They've reposted a bunch of the old Dojo articles, and it's pretty neat to take a stroll down memory lane. So Mike Flores in his article, Who's the Beatdown, essentially describes the idea of understanding who is in the sort of winning position. And what he does in order to describe this is he compares two decks that are similar, right? Like two aggro decks or two control decks. And in each of those games, the players need to sort of understand which role they are playing in who is the control deck and who is the aggro deck. One example he gives is somebody playing the deck Sly, which is basically red deck wins. It's like the most fast version of red deck wins, playing against a white weenie aggro deck. And he describes sort of this finals match where a friend of his ended up, I think, losing, and it was because he didn't understand which position that he was supposed to be in this game.
So I think a simpler way of putting this, it's essentially where are you aiming your lightning bolt. The bolt the bird phrase that people are familiar with Magic is, do you cast your lightning bolt and hit someone in the face, or do you bolt the birds of paradise? That's basically this, is understanding, are you the aggressor, or do you need to sort of shift into this sort of tempo interactive deck? We're going to be touching on a concept called positional heuristics from Characteristics of Games, which is basically the concept of being able to determine whether you are in the winning position of a game or the losing position of a game, or the clarity of determining how close or far you are from winning, or any player, really.
Different games have different clarity on this sort of heuristic. Magic is a game that is not particularly clear about what position you're in.
Right. The life total is kind of the closest we can get to that.
Yeah, and I think early on, players lean on the life total as being the thing that is sort of telling them what position they're in, right? If I have a lower life total, I'm less likely to win the game. Over time, what you start to realize as you get better at the game is that life total is not a particularly good indicator of who's going to win the game, and you need to understand how to evaluate the board state and the cards in your hand and sort of try to wrap your head around the unknown information that your opponent has to get a better idea of who is the beatdown. Who is the beatdown is just kind of a Magic terminology way to say who is in the leading position.
And this kind of connects back to something that we talk about a lot on the channel here called the strategy circle, which essentially we cover, there's three different ways that you're always kind of playing, which is either an econ or I guess a late game build, defense or interaction, and a rush or aggro. Sort of a strategy.
The strategy circle is basically labeling how you're choosing to spend your resources, right? Because you have a finite amount of them, and choosing where they go based on what position that your opponent is in is what's going to lead you to the right position to be in to win the game. So for instance, rush is investing your resources to win the game now. Economy is investing your resources to win the game later, and defense is investing your resources to stop your opponent from winning.
Most Magic decks, usually they can be slotted into one of these three, but being able to determine who's the beatdown, right, or look at the positional heuristics of Magic, you know whether or not you have to then dip into an interactive or an interaction strategy. And so this would be, the bolt the bird analogy is a good one. Or if you're a control deck, you're kind of determining, okay, I want to spend my resources going and getting closer to my win condition, or do I need to interact with my opponent's board state to prevent them from trying to win?
You know, when we look at the strategy circle and wrap our head around, okay, who's the beatdown? Once I know what position my opponent is in, right? Am I the beatdown or is my opponent? That's who's basically in the rush position. That's the person who's in a position to attempt to win the game now. And if your opponent is in that position, that means you need to move to the defense position to stop them from doing that, which is essentially what we're describing. A lightning bolt is a really good example of how to do this. So with this lightning bolt, right, if you are in the rush position, if you are the beatdown, you can use that lightning bolt to help you continue to win the game, right? You're investing your resources, one red mana and one card to move yourself closer to winning the game. If you are not the beatdown and your opponent is the beatdown, you need to move that lightning bolt into the defense position, which basically means it sounds like Yu-Gi-Oh! All of a sudden, but you need to spend that one red mana and that card to deal 3 damage to one of your opponent's creatures, which then could move them out of the rush position, right, in order for them to to stop them from beating you. Basically, part of the concept of who's the beatdown is understanding when you and or your opponent is misaligned in this, I guess, sort of rock, paper, scissors scenario. If your opponent thinks they're in the rush position, your opponent thinks they're the beatdown, but they're not, you know that you have plenty of time, or you know that you have something in your hand that can stop them from killing you at a certain point. You can go ahead and say, okay, I know my opponent thinks they're the beatdown. They're in the rush position, but I'm not that concerned about it yet. I don't need to move to the defense position yet. I can instead invest my resources in my economy into winning the game later, and I'm not at risk of losing just yet. I don't need to move to defense yet.
Right. And this is only really done through hidden information, right? Which is why having like a hand of hidden information that your opponent can get some sort of information from your untapped lands or colors of your deck or whatever. But generally, not being able to totally determine what your opponent's able to do means that those positional heuristics end up like becoming weaker, if we're going to use the terms from characteristics of games. But essentially, it just means that there's less certainty with knowing what the outcome of or what the possibilities of what your opponent can do on their turn.
Characteristics of games refers to heuristics as strong or weak. And weak heuristics mean that if you know the heuristic, it has a less of an impact on whether or not you're going to win the game. Where a strong heuristic means if you know it, you have a very high likelihood that you're going to win the game. So let's talk, I guess, a little bit about the difference between strong and weak positional heuristics in games.
The idea or the concept of who's the beatdown is not an exclusive thing to Magic. It's something that was coined through Magic, but the idea is, just recognizing whether you're on the offense or the defense, essentially. So if we look at something like Marvel Snap, as an example, Marvel Snap, in particular, any of these sort of lane games that have been coming out lately, these lanes are emulating the concept of who's the beatdown, in a sense. Is that it's clearly chunking the information so that players can see how close or far someone is from being able to win, and whether or not you are bouncing between moving towards your win condition or interacting with your opponent is choosing which lane you want to go into.
Let's explain how Marvel Snap works for those that haven't played it. You basically have 3 lanes on the board, and you and your opponent are going to be playing cards simultaneously, and then they both get revealed to the lane that you've played them in, and then you're just totaling up the number of strength of the cards that's in that lane, and who wins the most lanes wins the game. There's 3 lanes, so you're going to win. Somebody's going to win 2 out of 3, basically. There's also like some additional variants in terms of the locations themselves have sort of like location effects that are random that change and affect the characters that are at that location. The sort of positional heuristics in this game are considerably stronger than Magic's positional heuristics, where, Magic has like a number, which is your life total, but as we sort of talked about, that's not a particularly good indicator of who is actually winning the game, where here in Marvel Snap, the power amount at each of these individual lanes is a pretty good indicator of who's going to win that lane. Now, it does depend on like how vastly outpowered you are in those lanes, but effectively towards the end of the game, you can say, all right, I'm pretty sure my opponent is going to win this lane. I'm pretty sure I'm going to win that lane, so we're going to end up fighting over this other lane. And there still is some amount of unknown information there where you're going, okay, based on the type of deck my opponent is playing, how likely do I think it is that they're going to try to fight over that lane or do some kind of a switcheroo that like changes up where the power is distributed. Because that positional heuristic is so strong, Marvel Snaps needs additional ways to create variance to sort of mix up that sort of outcome. If there was only 1 lane, this game would be much too simple. But 2, if the location effects weren't random, you also would sort of end up being in this position where whoever's cards lined up better, that's probably the person who's just going to win the game. Another example of a game that's a good one to study for positional heuristics is Mario Kart. At face value, Mario Kart's a race. The person who's in first place is theoretically in the pole position. The positional heuristics theoretically should be very clear because you have first, second, third place, right? And in just a regular racing game, that would be the case. But Mario Kart in particular has a lot of mechanics that can upend the idea of these positional heuristics, where Blue Shell in particular, right? You're in first place, sure, but it also means the power-ups are much more likely to affect you and also in a much more powerful way.
Mario Kart at like the highest end, like you can start seeing people that they have these tactics they've developed to try and avoid the blue shell. There's people that are in second place that know roughly what distance to keep away from the first place player in case the blue shell comes out.
It has like an explosion radius.
Yeah. So like like I think the designers are aware of this, and I think players have also started to sort of develop these very specific heuristics in response to this, which is interesting, right? It means that players can be rewarded for this skill and this mastery to climb.
Yeah, and as long as there are actual options to choose from, I think that puts you in a much better position to be able to develop a skill as to what position you prefer to be in versus the blue shell, etc. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about takeaways, design lessons for Who's the Beatdown, positional heuristics generally speaking. What pros and cons are there for weak and strong positional heuristics?
I think it's funny because I think that Magic's positional heuristics are actually something that we can kind of like criticize on other games, in that like its life total is that sort of first level understanding of its positional heuristic, and that, yeah, players will look at it and be like, oh my God, you see this in Commander all the time. Like you have so much life right now. I can't believe that. And like suddenly that means you're winning.
Well, and players will make decisions based on life total too in Commander because it's a shorthand. It's like, oh, this person has more life, therefore they're in the best position, when that's not true, right?
So, but if we compare it to 1v1, there's plenty of games that I have lost when my opponent is at 1 life and I thought I was going to win. And so it can be viewed almost as a criticism that like it's technically the primary positional heuristic, but it's also not actually as solid as maybe people would want it to be. But I also think that there's like a mastery curve with that. That's kind of interesting. And once players realize that, it's sort of a skill that you start to develop to understand, you know, based off of the deck that you're going against, based off the deck that you are playing, like, is that life total actually within the means of you potentially winning or not winning?
Because Magic's positional heuristic is fairly weak, it creates a heuristics tree to climb, right? Which basically means as you learn more about the game, you learn a lot more signals of understanding who the beatdown is, who is in the pole position, whatever, who's going to win this game, right? And if your game has a much stronger positional heuristic, it means that players won't necessarily have that skill expression, that part of the game to explore. Now, that's not to say that like having that heuristics tree is necessarily better, right? It depends on the audience for the game. If your audience is a more casual audience, a very clear positional heuristic can really help them understand the game and make them feel like, oh, I could clearly see that I lost and it made sense to me.
Yeah, the more that your decision tree sort of branches out, obviously the more complexity, and that's going to change the direction of what audience or demographic is interested in your game. If you know who the beatdown is, please call the number at the bottom of the screen here. And please also feel free to give us a little like and a subscribe. I keep saying please. Beat down that subscribe button.
Smash it.
Smash that subscribe button.
Oh, God.
With your lightning bolts.
Oof. If you want to continue the conversation, or if you still have questions, you can join our Discord. The link is in the description below.
Get out of here.
See you next time.
Go.
Bye.
Leave.
Hey, if you want to meet Forrest in person, you can go to his booth at MagicCon Vegas, where he will be signing the cards that he has painted and will be offering his playmats and t-shirts that he has designed that you probably have seen here on the channel. So if you're going to be at MagicCon Vegas, make sure you swing by his booth and say hi.
I'll be there.